Something is about to split open, and the place where it happens may surprise you. It is not the circumstances around your life that are reaching a breaking point, but the identity you have been carrying for far longer than you realize. The role you learned to play, the polished version of yourself you believed everyone expected, the invisible disguise that slowly became your reality, all of it is approaching a moment when it can no longer remain hidden. The most unexpected part is that this unraveling will not begin because you consciously decide to change. It begins because the truth has become stronger than the performance. Today, August 2nd, the Sun in Leo forms an exact sesquiquadrate with black moon Lilith in Sagittarius. Many people overlook this kind of alignment because it is considered a minor aspect, assuming it cannot possibly carry significant weight. Yet that assumption is precisely what gives this moment its extraordinary power. The deepest turning points rarely announce themselves with dramatic fanfare. They emerge quietly, catching you completely off guard. This is not a soft invitation from the universe asking you to make gentle adjustments. It is the unmistakable pressure of a 135-degree angle, creating relentless friction between the person you have convinced yourself to be and the person who has always existed beneath that carefully managed surface. Once that hidden truth rises into your awareness today, it cannot simply be pushed back into darkness. You will never be able to look at yourself in exactly the same way again. If over the past several days you have noticed a strange restlessness that refuses to leave if irritation has appeared without any obvious cause, if it feels as though something beneath your skin has been quietly vibrating while your mind struggles to explain why, then pay close attention. Because there is a very specific reason this emotional tension has been building inside you. Its source reaches much deeper than today's alignment alone, and understanding that larger story changes everything. Before we can fully understand why this moment carries such intensity, we have to look back across the previous 10 days, because none of what is happening today appeared out of nowhere. The cosmic pattern has been unfolding piece by piece, preparing both the stage and your inner world while you continued living your ordinary life without recognizing that every experience was positioning you for this exact encounter. The universe has been assembling this sequence with remarkable precision. Think back to July 22nd, when the Sun entered Leo, the sign it naturally rules. That transition marked the beginning of an unmistakable energetic shift. Even if you did not know the astrology behind it, chances are you sensed something changing within yourself. Perhaps your confidence became easier to access. Perhaps you felt a stronger desire to express yourself, to create, to be acknowledged, or simply to stop hiding pieces of who you are. The Sun in Leo naturally amplifies vitality, visibility, and personal radiance. It encourages you to occupy the center of your own life and reminds you that your existence deserves to be seen rather than minimized. For a brief moment, it may have felt as though your story was finally moving in the direction you had been hoping for. Then everything changed. Only 5 days later, on July 27th, the Sun formed an opposition with Pluto in Aquarius, and the atmosphere became dramatically different. Instead of celebrating confidence, life began exposing the hidden structures supporting that confidence. Relationships revealed uncomfortable imbalances. Situations forced you to examine where power had been surrendered or manipulated. Emotional defenses that once seemed reliable suddenly felt fragile. Pluto has a remarkable ability to strip away illusions, and during that opposition, your sense of self was pulled into a profound psychological descent. It demanded honesty about control, fear, and the unconscious motivations shaping your choices. The experience was neither comfortable nor gentle. It was deeply transformative, and if you moved through it successfully, you likely emerged feeling as though an important chapter inside you had ended. Yet the story continued. On July 29th, only 2 days after that difficult confrontation, the Sun conjoined Jupiter in Leo. The emotional landscape shifted once again. Where Pluto had compressed and challenged the ego, Jupiter expanded it. Hope returned. Optimism grew. Confidence seemed stronger than ever before. It may have felt as though every loss had been compensated with something even greater, as though the universe had rewarded your perseverance by multiplying your strength. You may have begun believing that whatever Pluto attempted to dismantle had ultimately made you more powerful than before. That emotional expansion is precisely why today's alignment becomes so significant. By the time we arrive at August 2nd, the ego has survived challenge, received encouragement, and gradually convinced itself that the hardest lessons have already been completed. It begins believing that nothing else can truly shake it. That is the exact moment when Black Moon Lilith emerges from the unseen places of the psyche and reveals that the deepest work has only just begun. To understand why this encounter feels so powerful, it helps to understand who Black Moon Lilith actually represents. Unlike the visible planets moving across the sky, Black Moon Lilith is neither a planet nor an asteroid. It is a mathematical point marking the place where the Moon reaches its greatest distance from Earth during its orbit. Although invisible, the symbolism attached to this point is anything but insignificant. Throughout ancient mythology, Lilith was remembered as Adam's first wife, formed from the same earth rather than from his rib. She represented equality, independence, and an untamed spirit that refused to surrender its own nature. When she was expected to submit, she chose another path entirely. She did not argue for acceptance or bargain for approval. Instead, she spoke the forbidden name, unfolded her wings, and departed. She accepted exile rather than abandoning herself. She embraced the wilderness, instead of remaining inside a paradise that demanded obedience. That ancient story continues to echo through astrology, because Lilith symbolizes every part of your inner world that has been rejected, suppressed, or hidden to satisfy the expectations of others. She represents desires you taught yourself to silence, anger you swallowed in order to preserve harmony, instincts you disconnected from because someone convinced you they were unacceptable. She lives wherever you were told you expressed too much emotion, possessed too much intensity, spoke too honestly, desired too freely, carried too much passion, or refused to fit comfortably inside someone else's definition of who you should become. Every version of yourself that was locked away for the sake of acceptance still exists beneath the surface, waiting patiently for permission to breathe again. Today, that hidden voice begins pressing against the walls that have contained it for years. What makes this alignment especially volatile is the nature of the sesquiquadrate itself. A square often announces conflict openly. Its challenges appear directly in front of you, impossible to ignore. You recognize the obstacle immediately and understand that something demands action. The 135-degree sesquiquadrate behaves differently. Its pressure works beneath conscious awareness before finally revealing itself, allowing tension to accumulate quietly until the moment when maintaining the illusion becomes impossible. And that is exactly where this extraordinary story continues. Do not underestimate what feels almost invisible, because the forces that reshape a life rarely arrive with obvious warning signs. A sesquiquadrate does not announce itself the way louder astrological aspects often do. It moves quietly beneath your awareness, gradually increasing pressure until you realize you have been carrying discomfort for much longer than you admitted to yourself. Imagine living with a constant low fever that never becomes severe enough to send you to bed, yet never fully disappears either. Or imagine walking mile after mile with a small stone trapped inside your shoe. At first, you convince yourself it is manageable. You adjust your stride, ignore the irritation, and tell yourself it is not worth stopping. Eventually, that tiny discomfort begins influencing every step you take. That is the nature of today's energy. It is subtle enough to escape immediate recognition, yet persistent enough that it slowly invades your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions. You may have noticed an unexplained impatience following you throughout recent days. a strange inability to relax even when nothing appears objectively wrong, or an invisible tension that seems to hum beneath your skin without offering any logical explanation. That quiet agitation is not random. It is the signature of this exact celestial geometry preparing your inner world for a confrontation you can no longer postpone. The reason this feeling becomes so powerful is because today's alignment links two profoundly different dimensions of your identity. On one side stands the Sun in Leo, representing your conscious self, the identity you proudly display, the version of yourself you have cultivated and presented to the world. It reflects the image you hope others recognize, admire, and celebrate. Opposite that polished expression stands Black Moon Lilith, carrying everything that has been pushed beyond the boundaries of your accepted identity. She governs the instincts you suppressed, the truths you buried, the desires you convinced yourself were too dangerous to acknowledge, and the emotional territory you abandoned because acceptance seemed more important than authenticity. When these two archetypes become connected through today's sesquidrate, they cannot peacefully coexist without demanding change. Something inside your carefully maintained identity begins losing its grip. The performance becomes harder to sustain. The role you have rehearsed for months, perhaps even years, begins revealing small fractures that can no longer remain hidden. What finally emerges rarely arrives with elegance or careful timing. Instead, it escapes unexpectedly through unconscious moments that bypass your usual filters. It may appear as a Freudian slip that exposes what you truly think before your mind can censor it. It may erupt through an emotional outburst that surprises even you. It may emerge as one sentence spoken impulsively during an emotionally charged conversation, words that reveal more about your heart than you ever intended to share and that cannot simply be taken back afterward. Those moments are not accidents. They are evidence that Lilith has already begun pressing against the walls, separating your conscious identity from everything you have exiled within yourself. Remember the unexplained irritation we explored earlier, that persistent buzzing beneath your emotions, the nervous tension that seems disconnected from any visible cause. That sensation is not merely emotional exhaustion. It is the growing pressure of Lilith searching for an opening. She has been testing every weak point inside the carefully constructed identity you have relied upon. And today those barriers become too fragile to contain what has been waiting beneath them. The truth preparing to emerge is far more significant than an ordinary confession or a forgotten mistake. This is not about discovering a minor secret, an insignificant purchase, or a harmless deception from recent days. The revelation associated with this transit reaches much deeper into the foundations of your life, because it concerns the relationship you have established with your own power. It exposes the subtle ways you may have abandoned pieces of yourself without consciously realizing it. It asks whether you have sacrificed authenticity to preserve a certain reputation, whether you have remained inside relationships that required you to silence your deepest instincts, or whether you have continued maintaining a version of life that appears admirable from the outside while leaving you emotionally disconnected within. The Sun in Leo naturally seeks recognition. It wants to shine brightly, to inspire admiration, to occupy the role of hero within its own story. There is nothing inherently wrong with that desire. Yet Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius measures fulfillment through an entirely different standard. She has little interest in appearances or public approval. Her concern is freedom. She asks whether the beliefs you proudly express are genuinely reflected in the way you live each day. She questions whether the independence you celebrate is authentic, or whether it has quietly become another strategy for avoiding genuine emotional vulnerability. This is where today's collision becomes deeply personal. You may suddenly recognize that the philosophy guiding your choices no longer nourishes your spirit the way you once believed it did. You may realize that someone you trusted as a teacher, guide, or influential leader has been encouraging liberation with their words while quietly demanding unquestioning obedience through their actions. You may even discover that your relentless pursuit of new adventures, new experiences, and distant horizons has not been driven entirely by inspiration. Instead, it may have become an elegant way of avoiding the stillness required to confront yourself. What once looked like freedom may reveal itself as another carefully disguised escape. That realization is unlikely to arrive wrapped in comforting certainty. It may feel as though the ground beneath your identity suddenly shifts, forcing you to question assumptions you once believed were permanent. The remarkable thing about today's sesquiquadrate is that it does not limit its work to your inner dialogue alone. It frequently chooses other people as mirrors through which your hidden truths become visible. Someone may cross your path today whose presence immediately captures your attention because they openly embody qualities you have spent years suppressing within yourself. Perhaps they speak with fearless honesty that makes others uncomfortable. Perhaps they express emotion without apology. Perhaps they move through life with an intensity that feels simultaneously irresistible and deeply unsettling. However you respond to this individual becomes extraordinarily important because your reaction reveals far more about your own inner landscape than it does about them. If you experience an almost overwhelming attraction that seems impossible to explain logically, you may be witnessing your own shadow, recognizing the qualities it longs to reclaim. If your immediate impulse is criticism, moral judgment, or a desire to distance yourself from them, your conscious identity may be defending itself against uncomfortable recognition. If their presence awakens profound fear or emotional unease that exceeds anything the situation objectively deserves, that response may reveal the deepest layer of all. The individual who provokes your strongest emotional reaction today often reflects the exact aspect of yourself that has been neglected, silenced, or deprived of expression for far too long. They become a living mirror placed directly before you, and once you truly recognize what that reflection reveals, your understanding of yourself cannot remain the same. As this profound psychological process unfolds, another significant shift quietly reshapes the atmosphere surrounding it. Only hours before the Sun in Leo forms its exact sesquiquadrate with Black Moon, Lilith in Sagittarius today, Venus, the planet associated with love, beauty, and personal values, completes her departure from Leo and enters Virgo. While Venus traveled through Leo, affection naturally expressed itself through warmth, dramatic romance, heartfelt generosity, and the desire to love, boldly making every emotional gesture feel larger than life. And that transition now prepares the emotional landscape for an entirely different chapter that is about to unfold. The moment Venus leaves Leo and steps into Virgo, something subtle yet unmistakable changes inside you. It is almost as if a veil quietly slips away from your eyes. The emotional fantasy that once softened every disappointment begins dissolving, replaced by a level of clarity that feels impossible to escape. Love no longer survives on dramatic promises or beautiful intentions alone. It becomes something measurable, something observable, something that demands evidence. Instead of asking how deeply someone feels, you begin asking how consistently they show up. Instead of being captivated by grand declarations, your attention shifts toward the smallest daily behaviors, the unnoticed patterns, the details that reveal whether affection is supported by action. Virgo has little patience for illusion. It examines every interaction with remarkable precision, exposing weaknesses that were always present but conveniently ignored. By the time today's Black Moon Lilith activation reaches its peak, your awareness has already been heightened. Long before the breakthrough arrives, your heart has quietly begun auditing every meaningful relationship in your life. You may already find yourself wondering whether the devotion you continue offering is truly being returned. You may already be weighing the emotional cost of remaining exactly where you are against the uncertainty of walking away. Those questions are not random thoughts. They are the emotional groundwork preparing you for what comes next. Then Lilith arrives, and everything hidden beneath the surface suddenly refuses to remain buried. Feelings that have silently accumulated over months, perhaps even years, rise with extraordinary force. Resentment that you convinced yourself had disappeared reveals it was only waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. The personal freedom you slowly surrendered in exchange for comfort or stability suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Its absence is felt with surprising intensity, almost as though you have awakened to discover an essential part of yourself has been missing all along. You may recognize that a relationship has continued existing not because of what it truly is, but because of what you desperately hoped it could someday become. That realization carries tremendous emotional weight because once it reaches consciousness, denial is no longer available. Venus in Virgo quietly removes every layer of romantic decoration, while Black Moon Lilith strips away every remaining excuse, leaving only the unembellished reality of your emotional connections. What remains is neither flattering nor comforting, but it is undeniably honest, and honesty becomes the foundation for everything that follows. As powerful as that emotional awakening already is, another planetary movement amplifies its impact even further. On August 2nd, the very same day the Sun forms its exact sesquiquadrate with Black Moon Lilith in Sagittarius, Mars, the planet associated with action, determination, and confrontation, enters Gemini. This transition dramatically changes the way today's revelations express themselves. Mars, moving through Gemini channels, energy directly into the mind and the voice. Thoughts accelerate. Conversations become sharper. Reactions arrive before careful reflection has a chance to intervene. The nervous system feels electrically charged, making silence increasingly difficult to maintain. This matters because whatever truth Lilith succeeds in uncovering today refuses to remain hidden inside your private thoughts. Mars ensures that what has been silently building finally finds language. Words that have remained trapped beneath the surface suddenly demand expression. You may send a message during the quiet hours of the night that permanently alters the direction of a relationship. You may unexpectedly speak a sentence during an ordinary conversation that changes its entire course. You may finally express emotions that have remained unspoken for countless months, releasing them in one uncontrollable wave of complete honesty. Yet Mars in Gemini carries its own challenge. It moves quickly, often faster than wisdom. Rather than directing energy with precision, it scatters it across multiple directions at once. Because of that, the truth may emerge imperfectly. It may be spoken before the timing is ideal. It may reach someone who was never meant to hear it first. It may arrive with more intensity than you originally intended. Even so, the universe is no longer supporting silence. Suppression has reached its limit, and expression becomes unavoidable. Then, only one day later, another profound shift deepens everything that has just occurred. On August 3rd, Chiron, known as the Wounded Healer, stations retrograde at 0 degrees of Taurus. This moment carries exceptional significance because Chiron only entered Taurus a few weeks earlier, in June, beginning a 7-year journey devoted to healing wounds connected with the physical body material stability. And perhaps the most fundamental question every human being eventually faces: am I worthy? When Chiron turns retrograde, it creates a pause rather than forward momentum. It asks you to stop rushing ahead long enough to examine what has just unfolded. The emotional exposure initiated by Black Moon Lilith on August 2nd does not exist in isolation. Chiron immediately connects that revelation to the deepest layers of your relationship with self-worth. A powerful pattern begins revealing itself. Many individuals abandon their authenticity, suppress their instinctive nature, and silence their untamed Lilith energy, not because freedom holds no appeal, but because somewhere beneath conscious awareness they have accepted the belief that they have not earned the right to live freely. They become convinced that acceptance must always be purchased through performance. They believe they must continually prove their value before occupying space exactly as they are. They mistake approval for worthiness and sacrifice authenticity in the process. The breakthrough delivered by Lilith on August the 2nd functions as the diagnosis, exposing the hidden pattern that has quietly governed so many choices. Chiron's retrograde on August 3rd marks the beginning of something much slower, deeper, and more embodied. It begins the long process of healing not only through insight, but through the nervous system, the body, and the lived experience of reclaiming self-acceptance. The revelation and the wound are separated by only a single day, yet that timing is far from accidental. It reflects an intentional cosmic design where awareness arrives first and healing immediately follows. None of these events stand alone. Each one has been carefully positioned as preparation for a much greater turning point that is rapidly approaching. That larger moment arrives on August 12th, when a solar eclipse occurs in Leo. Solar eclipses are never minor adjustments. They represent complete resets, closing one chapter with unmistakable finality while opening another that permanently changes the direction of personal identity. They reshape the path ahead in ways that cannot easily be reversed. Everything uncovered by Black Moon Lilith on August the 2nd becomes the essential material this eclipse will use during that transformation. Whatever truth emerges now cannot simply be hidden again or return to the darkness where it once lived. Once exposed, it becomes part of your conscious reality, and from that moment forward, the rebuilding of your identity begins upon a foundation that is finally rooted in truth rather than performance, preparing you for the extraordinary transformation that is still waiting just beyond the horizon. The confession you finally allow yourself to make, the limit you finally refuse to let others cross, the identity you finally stop pretending to be, those moments are not isolated breakthroughs. They become the very foundation upon which the solar eclipse arriving on August the 12th will begin rebuilding your life. Everything exposed today becomes the material for the transformation that follows. Nothing revealed is wasted. Those who choose to face Black Moon Lilith with honesty, who allow the carefully protected image to fracture instead of desperately trying to preserve it, who accept every imperfect, passionate, complicated, and untamed part of themselves without turning away, are the very people who will move into the coming eclipse carrying extraordinary momentum. They will discover that surrendering the illusion of perfection creates space for a far more authentic version of themselves to emerge. The experience may be uncomfortable in the present moment, yet it becomes the doorway through which remarkable personal evolution unfolds. On the other hand, those who resist what has been uncovered, those who rush to repair the mask instead of questioning why they needed it in the first place, those who cling even tighter to appearances, deny what has surfaced, or continue performing an identity that no longer reflects who they truly are, may discover that the eclipse refuses to cooperate with that resistance. Solar eclipses do not negotiate with false foundations. Whatever has already reached the end of its purpose will continue dissolving whether permission is granted or not. The cosmos is not acting from cruelty. It is removing structures that can no longer support your future, even when your conscious mind still believes they provide safety. Although this transit carries universal significance, its expression unfolds differently according to your elemental nature, because the point of friction enters the area where your own energy naturally concentrates. For those born under the fire signs of Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius, today's revelation reaches directly into the core of identity itself. The image you have spent years cultivating, the heroic narrative that has defined your choices, the philosophical beliefs you have relied upon as emotional protection, all become subjects of profound examination. The hidden realization for fire signs may be that the admiration you continuously pursue has quietly become another form of captivity. The applause that once seemed empowering may have gradually turned into a prison where authenticity feels increasingly difficult to express. You may recognize that what has appeared as fierce independence was, in reality, a deeply rooted response to old emotional wounds. The greatest courage now is no longer found in overcoming external obstacles, but in remaining still long enough to encounter the fears that exist within your own heart. For the earth signs of Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, this energy enters the realm of physical reality, material security, and personal value. You may suddenly recognize that stability has required sacrificing far more passion than you ever intended. You may discover that the endless effort to repair every problem, perfect every detail, and maintain complete control has quietly become an attempt to manage the fears you have never fully confronted. Today's truth reminds you that your value has never depended upon possessions, productivity, achievement, or usefulness. Your existence carries worth long before you accomplish anything at all. For the air signs of Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, today's friction moves through the landscape of thought, communication, and relationships. You may become aware that constantly seeing every perspective has sometimes prevented you from standing firmly for your own truth. You may realize that maintaining harmony has occasionally required sacrificing pieces of your authentic voice. Even your desire to improve the lives of others may reveal a hidden longing to be acknowledged as the one who made the difference. This is not a condemnation of your generosity. It is an invitation to separate genuine service from the subtle need for recognition. For the water signs of Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, the journey unfolds within the deepest emotional layers of your inner world. You may recognize that your instinct to nurture has gradually transformed into a need to manage other people's lives. You may discover that repeatedly expecting betrayal reflects unresolved fears surrounding trust and surrender rather than the behavior of those around you. You may even realize that compassion has become a reason for tolerating violations of boundaries that should have been protected long ago. Every element receives its own lesson, because every soul carries a different doorway into its shadow. No one stands outside this process. The hidden self eventually calls every individual home. It is important to understand that none of this represents punishment. It represents liberation in its purest form. The experience may feel overwhelming because watching an identity begin to crack rarely feels comfortable. Yet the greatest misunderstanding surrounding the shadow has always been believing that it exists as an enemy. In reality, the shadow safeguards enormous personal power. Every instinct you rejected because someone labeled it unacceptable. Every desire you buried in order to fit comfortably into someone else's expectations. Every emotional truth you silenced for the sake of belonging. Those forgotten places are where your most authentic self has continued waiting. They are where your creativity burns without limitation. They are where your vitality has remained patiently alive, even while hidden from view. The ancient story of Lilith reminds us of this profound truth. She did not leave the garden because she lacked value or because something inside her was damaged. She walked away because remaining required abandoning her wholeness, and she refused to exchange authenticity for acceptance. Today, that same question echoes through your own life with remarkable clarity. Will you continue choosing a version of existence that demands smaller and smaller pieces of your true nature, or will you accept the uncertainty that accompanies becoming fully yourself? The sesquiquadrate offers no comfortable middle ground. Its 135-degree tension continues applying pressure until avoidance is no longer sustainable. It creates irritation precisely because irritation demands attention. It repeatedly returns to the places you would rather ignore until you finally become willing to look directly at what has been asking for healing all along. The extraordinary shift begins the moment you stop defending the image and begin embracing the truth beneath it. As that happens, something remarkable unfolds inside you. The exhausting internal conflict gradually loses its intensity. The strange emotional buzzing that has followed you through recent days or even recent weeks begins settling into quiet understanding. Restlessness transforms into recognition, because what once felt mysterious finally has a clear name. Naming an experience changes your relationship with it. Once truth becomes conscious, it no longer controls you from the shadows. That is why today should never be mistaken for a story about destruction. It is a story about revelation, and genuine revelation has always marked the beginning of freedom. If powerful emotions begin rising within you today, if familiar defenses begin falling away, if long-restrained words suddenly insist on being spoken, resist the temptation to force everything back into silence. Do not immediately suppress what is asking to be acknowledged. Allow the old image to loosen its grip, because beneath every performance, beneath every carefully managed identity, beneath every version of yourself that was designed to satisfy the expectations of the world, there exists a far more authentic presence that has simply been waiting for permission to breathe freely again. The moment you allow that hidden self into the light, you may recognize something your soul has quietly known for years. The authentic person within you was never the source of the struggle. The disguise carried the burden, not the truth. Today, that disguise begins falling away, and beneath it rests the strength, freedom, and creative power that have been waiting for this exact moment to emerge. Thank you for spending this time exploring these extraordinary cosmic movements together. If this message resonated with your journey and you would like to continue following future insights, consider subscribing so you will not miss what comes next. Your support truly means a great deal. I would also love to hear how these energies are unfolding in your own experience, so feel free to share your reflections in the comments. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself. Stay open to the wisdom unfolding around you, and join us again for more explorations into the deeper language of the cosmos.